Ay, ay, ay. Good evening, good vach, Shavua Tov. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Let's light up the darkness. Tonight we counted 49 days of the Omer, which means that tomorrow night starts Shevuos. We've been counting. This is the 7th one. Where we ask at the end of the counting, and the merit of the counting that I did tonight, may there be corrected any blemish that I have caused in the Sephira, Malchus Shebe Malchus, Malchus, kingship, sovereignty, and so much of improving ourselves is submitting to the sovereignty of God, having God in our lives, understanding that our Creator creates us, not just once created the universe and then let it go, but is creating us anew constantly. It's like we're plugged into our Creator at all time. It's giving us life. He is giving us life, giving us power, giving us energy. And how can we ever give back to an infinite being? By doing His will and learning Torah together. What a wonderful way to express and do the will of our Creator. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? Joe in the Inland Empire, Shandora in the Bronx, my East Coast heroes, Belle in Texas, Bella in Florida, Guy in Ohio, John in Maine, Bill in mid-Missouri, Sharon in New Jersey, Elvis in New York. My goodness, 6 minutes before 1 o'clock in the morning, you're learning Torah. You've made the Torah something special and important in your life. What an incredible, incredible accomplishment. Ella in Southern California, Alan in New York City, Chaim in Florida. I'm in awe. And I'm going to make it efficient and quick. It's a very short daf tonight. It would have been a prime spot to do a double, but I just can't do that to my East Coasters. So let's get into it. We're picking this up at the bottom, near the bottom of 23b. We started Mishna number 2 here in chapter 3 of tractate Shevuos, the 26th volume of the Talmud. And the idea that if someone makes an oath that he will not eat, and then he both eats and drinks, he'd only be liable to bring one sin offering for violating his oath. But if he said, on my oath, I will not eat or drink, I'm just teaching here, and then he ate and drank, then it would be 2 separate oaths and 2 separate offerings. That's the basic concept. Now, the Mishnah teaches that if one said, on my oath I will not eat, and he ate foods that are inedible, right? So all he said was, I will not eat. He didn't say, I will not eat dirt. He didn't say, I will not eat non-kosher food. All he says is, I will not eat, right? And then he eats dirt. Well, that doesn't count as eating, so he didn't violate his oath. On my oath, I will not eat, and he ate foods that are inedible, he is exempt. If he said, on my oath, I will not eat, and then he ate nevela, right, the meat of an unslaughtered carcass, a kosher animal, not slaughtered in a kosher animal, not slaughtered in a kosher manner, he is liable, right? So it's not fit for him to eat because he's a Jew and it's not kosher, but it's still considered eating, whereas eating dirt would not be considered eating. Now the Gemara asks, wait a minute. This Mishnah itself is difficult. You said that if one said, on my oath I will not eat, and he ate foods that are inedible or drank liquids that are not potable, he's exempt. And then the Mishnah teaches that if one says, on my oath I will not eat, and then he ate nevela or treifa or repugnant creatures or creeping animals, in other words, unkosher foods, he is liable. What is different about the first clause that he is exempt, and what is different in the latter clause that he is liable? And so what's implied by the question is, what are you talking about? If a Jew eats non-kosher foods, it's like he's eating dirt. It's that the perspective of this question is that non-kosher foods are to a Jew the same as dirt is to a Jew. He can't eat that. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult. The first clause is where he took an oath not to eat without specifying what is included in it. All he said is, I will not eat. Presumably, his oath did not include items that are not ordinarily eaten. And the latter clause is a case where he specifies what it is he will not eat. For example, unslaughtered carcasses, nevela, and nevertheless eats them. Right? So in other words, for at least the perspective of this question, for him to become liable for eating when he eats non-kosher food, it's because he said the oath was to eat not kosher food and he then ate it. The Gemara asks, you may also raise a difficulty with regard to the case where he specifies that he will not eat non-kosher items. What's the problem there? If he takes an oath to say he won't eat a treifa or he won't eat a nevela, that's a meaningless statement because he's already under oath not to eat those things. And we say that you can't take an oath on something that you already prohibited to yourself by an oath. When did he take an oath not to eat non-kosher things? His soul was at Mount Sinai like every other Jew. And we all took an oath not to eat things that are outside the law as given to us in the Torah. Right? Why? He is under oath from Mount Sinai, and an oath does not take effect to prohibit that which is already forbidden. Rav and Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan all say that this is a case where he incorporates into the oath that he will not eat some permitted items, along with the statement permitted concerning the forbidden items. Since the oath takes effect with regard to the permitted items, it extends also to the forbidden ones, right? So they're going to give an example of this in a moment, and then we'll discuss it again. And Reish Lakish says, you find that one is liable for eating non-kosher food as a result of an oath, only because he's already under oath not to eat non-kosher food. But his oath will take effect when he swears not to eat non-kosher food, if he's swearing to something that wasn't already prohibited to him that's included in the oath. There's a few different ways you could do that. Here's one. Where he specifies that it includes a half measure, right? So as we've said, when do you become liable for eating non-kosher food? The general case is when you've eaten an olive bulk, right? Just in general, when do you become liable for eating non-kosher food, oaths aside? There's a minimum measure for it to qualify as eating, and that's about the volume of an olive bulk of food. And so if he eats less than that, it's not that it's permitted, but he doesn't become liable under Torah law until he eats the olive bulk. If he takes an oath that he won't even eat less than the minimum measure, now he's prohibited something to himself that wasn't technically prohibited before, and therefore the oath does take effect, right? You find this only where he specifies that his oath includes a half measure, meaning less than the minimum measure, and in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, that one is not liable for eating a half measure unless he specified that in his oath. Since eating a half measure is not prohibited by Torah law, meaning it is prohibited by rabbinic law, the oath takes effect. Alternatively, you find that one is liable if he took the oath without specifying that the oath prohibits less than the usual measure, and in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says that a person renders himself prohibited from eating any amount by taking an oath not to eat, right? The rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva said all he mentioned was eating, so he doesn't become liable for violating his oath until he eats the minimum measure. Rabbi Akiva says that might be the law for becoming liable for eating prohibited foods, but when you take an oath not to eat, and then you eat any amount, you have violated your oath. The Gemara asks, granted, it is understood why Rabbi Yochanan did not say, like Reish Lakish, as he interprets the Mishnah so that it is in accordance with the opinion of everyone. But what is the reason that Reish Lakish does not say like the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan? And the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish could say to you, When we say that a more inclusive prohibition, which adds additional aspects to the prohibition for the same individual, can take effect where there's already a prohibition in place, it is with regard to a prohibition that occurs on its own, like the prohibition against eating on Yom Kippur. Now we're on page 24a, which is more inclusive than the prohibition against eating non-kosher food, and therefore takes effect. But with regard to a prohibition that occurs by the act of a person himself, i.e. an oath or a vow, we do not say that because it is more inclusive, it can take effect also with regard to items that are already forbidden by Torah law. This is going to become a little bit clearer as we go on. The Gemara asks, granted, according to Reish Lakish, who understands the Mishnah to be dealing with the case of one who took an oath about less than a full measure, it is due to this reason that Rabbi Shimon deems exempt one who takes an oath prohibiting himself from eating non-kosher food, as it is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Shimon says, any amount is sufficient to render one liable to receive lashes, and the sages stated the measure of an olive bulb to determine only liability to bring an offering. According to Reish Lakish, Rabbi Shimon holds that one is already under oath from Mount Sinai, even with regard to less than the minimum measure, and for that reason the oath does not take effect. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who understands the Mishnah to be referring to an oath that includes erstwhile permitted items, what is the reason that Rabbi Shimon deems one exempt from bringing an offering for breaking an oath not to eat non-kosher food? And now we get to it. The Gemara answers, isn't the reason that the first Tana holds that the individual is liable for violating his oath only due to the fact that the oath generates a more inclusive prohibition, right? If you took an oath not to eat and then you ate non-kosher food, did you add to the oath that you were already under to not eat non-kosher food because you stood at Mount Sinai, right? Well, when you say just not, if all you said was not eat, well, absolutely you're adding to the oath that you had, right? You're saying not eat at all. That includes permitted items and not permitted items. And if an oath includes something new, right, that you prohibited onto yourself that wasn't already prohibited, then additional items that are also included in that oath, which you were already prohibited to eat, nevertheless are a valid oath. This oath takes effect. And so now if you ate non-kosher food, it would violate not only your general prohibition on eating non-kosher food, but also this new oath. If you only said, that takes an oath not to eat some non-kosher item, that he was already under oath for, he didn't add anything in the new oath. But when the new oath just says, I will not eat generally, you added, right, that things that were permitted to you are not permitted to you now. And so this will also include an oath covering things that were already prohibited to you. And we'll get a clearer example of that shortly. Now, in this matter, Rabbi Shimon conforms to a standard line of reasoning, in that he does not hold that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where a pre-existing prohibition is in place. And this is in accordance with that which is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Shimon says, one who eats non-kosher meat on Yom Kippur is exempt from bringing an offering for eating on Yom Kippur, despite the fact that the prohibition against eating on Yom Kippur is a more inclusive prohibition than that of eating non-kosher meat, as on that day, one may not eat anything, right? Rabbi Shimon would say exempt. We would say, no, of course, you're not allowed to eat anything on Yom Kippur. You ate non-kosher meat. In fact, you committed two averos, two sins, two transgressions, one for eating and one for eating non-kosher food. Rabbi Shimon would say what you did was not eating, right? From the verse, but we don't follow Rabbi Shimon. From the verse, or if anyone take an oath clearly with his lips to do evil or to do good, Leviticus 5:4. So the sages derive that one is liable to bring an offering for an oath on an utterance, meaning an oath that to not eat something which was already prohibited by an earlier oath, only when the oath is such that it could be inverted from the positive to the negative or vice versa. What does this mean? For example, one is liable for violating an oath to eat, right? He took an oath to eat, maybe just general. He said tomorrow, he vows that tomorrow he will eat. So he's saying he will not fast, right? That's what he's saying. For example, one is liable for violating an oath to eat. I'm sorry. Let's start again. For example, one is liable for violating an oath to eat because one can also take an oath not to eat. Okay. Now the Gemara asks, granted, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, you find a case where the oath can be negative or positive. Therefore, one is liable, according to the rabbis, when he takes an oath that he will eat any amount, since he could also take an oath that he will not eat any amount. But according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, granted that you can find a case of a negative oath, as the oath not to eat non-kosher animals takes effect when it includes other erstwhile permitted items. But how can you find a positive version of this oath? An oath by a Jew to eat non-kosher animals cannot take effect, as eating non-kosher animals is prohibited by Torah law. You can't swear an oath that you will violate the Torah, right? Oaths only have meaning under Torah law. So an oath to break Torah law is a meaningless utterance. Rather, do not distinguish between the former and the latter clauses of the Mishnah based on whether he specifies what he is eating. In both cases, he takes an oath not to eat without specifying. He just says, I won't eat. In the case where he eats something inedible, like dirt, he is exempt, in accordance with that which Rava says. As Rava says, that if one said, on my oath, I will not eat, and he ate dirt, he is exempt, since eating an inedible substance is not considered to be eating. Eating non-kosher meat is considered to be eating. For that reason, the latter clause of the Mishnah states that one is liable for doing so if he took an oath not to eat. The oath takes effect with regard to non-kosher items because, as Rabbi Yochanan noted, it includes items that would otherwise be permitted. Right? Since he said he will not eat, period, that includes permitted foods, and he won't eat those. And so now, if he ate something non-kosher, that's also covered because it was an more inclusive oath prohibiting from eating than what he was already prohibited to eat, which was non-kosher food. Rab Mari said, but therefore, according to this, if he took an oath not to eat non-kosher animals, which he was already prohibited to do, and then he ate, he would be exempt from bringing an offering for violating his oath. He might have to bring an offering for eating non-kosher food, but he won't have to bring an offering for violating his oath because he was already, that oath never took effect since he was already prohibited in non-kosher foods. Rab Mari said, we learn in the Mishnah on page 22b, this Mishnah we're speaking about now, number 2 in chapter 3, as well that eating non-kosher food is considered eating, as if one said, it is konam for my wife to derive benefit from me if I ate today and he had eaten nevela or trephos, repugnant creatures or creeping animals, his wife is prohibited from deriving benefit from him because we call that eating. The Gemara asks, how can these cases be compared there, since he initially ate the forbidden item and only then took an oath saying that he did not eat? In taking the oath, he granted significance to the non-kosher food, and that is why his eating forbidden items is considered to be eating. Now on page 24b. But here, where he took an oath not to eat, and then he ate non-kosher food, did he thereby give significance to it? Does he consider it eating? Right? So very interesting that whether something constitutes eating or not may depend on whether the person doing the eating considers it eating or not, which might imply that, well, if a person actually thinks he gets sustenance from eating dirt and he eats dirt, so maybe that is eating for him. But that's not what actually we're going to discuss right now, so let's keep going. For this reason, no conclusive proof can be cited from the last case in the Mishnah. So we say, Rabbi Yochanan understands the Mishnah as referring to a case in which the oath takes effect because it is a more inclusive prohibition than the prohibition against eating non-kosher food, in that it adds additional prohibitions for the same individual. In this context, Rava says, what is the reasoning of the one who holds that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where there already is a prohibition in place? And Rava answers his own question. It is just as it is in the case of an expanded prohibition, which incorporates additional people into the list of those for whom the original item is forbidden. An expanded prohibition also takes effect despite the fact that there is already a prohibition in place. And with regard to one who exempts another from liability in the case of the more inclusive prohibition, as he does not hold that it takes effect, that is with regard to a single piece, i.e. that the number of people who are prohibited from eating the same piece of meat is expanded. Right? Are we saying, if you say that you own a piece of meat and it is konam to you and konam to others, right? You're making it prohibited not only for yourself but for others, right? Then you're expanding the world of people who can't eat that piece of meat versus, that he takes an oath not to eat meat and not to eat chicken, something like that. Then he's expanding the number of things that are prohibited to him. Now, with regard to two distinct pieces, i.e. a case where the new prohibition expands the scope of prohibited items for the same person, as in an inclusive prohibition, we do not say that it takes effect. Let's hold on that. Now, here's a nice, clear example. And Rava says, according to the one who holds that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect where another prohibition is already in place, the law should be as follows. When a person says, on my oath, I will not eat figs. Okay, I'm just teaching. So what did he just do? He swore an oath, right? So this is a Shevuos, not a neder. It's not a vow. It's swearing before God. And what did he say? In the future, I will not eat figs. So it might be, he didn't specify a time, so maybe we're not going to add a time component to it. Or maybe he said, tomorrow I will not eat figs, right? But he swore an oath about that. So if he eats figs, he it's permitted for him to eat figs generally, but he made figs prohibited to himself through this oath. So if he eats figs, now he violated his oath. If he did it unintentionally, he's liable to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing for violating his oath. Then, so he says, on my oath, I will not eat figs. And then he says, on my oath, I will not eat figs and grapes. And then the next day, he eats figs. So now we have two oaths. The first oath is, I will not eat figs. The second oath is, I will not eat figs and grapes. The question is, when he eats figs the next day, and he does it, let's say, unintentionally, does he become liable to bring one sin offering or two? The figs were already prohibited to him. The second oath, however, added something new to the world of what's prohibited to him, right? Figs and grapes. So that oath takes effect because it includes a new item. And when the second oath takes effect because of the new item, it brings with it the rest of itself. I will not eat figs, right? So in fact, even though figs were already prohibited to him by the first oath, the second oath takes effect not only for grapes, but also for figs. And therefore, the next day when he eats one fig, one act of eating, he will become liable to bring two offerings for violating two different oaths. And that's why we would say, in the more sort of complicated, generalized example, that somebody who swore not to eat non-kosher food and then ate non-kosher food, he didn't violate his oath because the oath never took effect. But if he said, I will not eat, right? Now he brought things that are permitted into his oath, and that carries along with it things that would have been otherwise prohibited anyway. And that's why then if he eats nevela, he does become liable for violating that oath. Because this oath brings with it a new prohibition than anything else that's covered under the term eating, even if it was already prohibited to him, would trigger violation of the oath and liability to bring an offering. About this one, though, on my oath I will not eat figs, and then he says, on my oath I will not eat figs and grapes. Since the last oath takes effect with regard to the grapes, it also takes effect with regard to the figs, even though they were already forbidden by his previous oath. And I think, thank you, a nice simple example. Now we understand so much more. But the Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? And the Gemara answers, lest you say that we say that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect only with regard to a prohibition that occurs on its own, like the prohibition against eating non-kosher food, but with regard to a prohibition that occurs by the act of the person himself, when he makes grapes and figs prohibited to himself, we do not say that the more inclusive prohibition takes effect. Rava teaches us that there is no difference. Right? If you swear an oath on something that was already prohibited, but your oath includes something new that's prohibited to you, then even the things that were already prohibited to you are included in this oath, and you will become liable for violating your oath if you eat those foods. Rava, the son of Rabba, raises an objection from a Mishna, Karisos 13b. It is possible for a person to perform one act of eating for which he is liable to bring 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. And these are the prohibitions one can violate in this manner. One act of eating is going to trigger, you did it unintentionally, so it's going to trigger liability to bring 5 different offerings. 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. How so? If you are tameh, right, a person who's ritually impure and who ate forbidden fat, that is left over from sacrificial animals on Yom Kippur, right? So he's eating sacrificial food. That's why if he's tameh, that's a transgression. If he eats a part of the sacrificial animal that is not permitted to eat, like the forbidden fat, that's a second one. If he ate on Yom Kippur, that's a third one. If he ate it that was left over from the sacrificial foods, which that would have become prohibited because it was left over, that's nasar. That's 4. And if he did this and was unaware of the relevant prohibitions, he's liable to bring 4 sin offerings, as well as a guilt offering for deriving benefit from misuse of consecrated property, meila. Since it wasn't permitted to him and it was consecrated property, that's the guilt offering. Rabbi Meir says, also, if it was Shabbos, Yom Kippur can fall on Shabbos, and he transferred the item from one domain to another in his mouth, he is liable to bring a sin offering for performing labor on Shabbos as well. The rabbi said to him, this is not a prohibition of the same type, since in the case of Rabbi Meir's additional prohibition, he does not violate it by eating. Transporting is not eating. Rava, the son of Rabba, explains the objection that arises from that Mishnah to what is relevant here now in Tractate Shevuos. And if it is so that a more inclusive prohibition takes effect, then you can find a case where one is liable for the violation of 5 prohibitions in one act of eating, such as where one says in the aforementioned situation, on my oath I will not eat dates and forbidden fat. Since the oath takes effect with regard to the dates, it can also take effect with regard to the forbidden fat. And the fact that the Mishnah fails to mention such an oath indicates that a more inclusive prohibition does not take effect where another prohibition is already in place. And the perspective of this question is, if the Gemara, it's not possible that the Tana of that Mishnah failed to think of this additional possibility when he was saying how one act of eating on Yom Kippur can trigger, 4 sin offerings and 1 guilt offering. Obviously, if it was possible to also swear an oath that includes both something permitted and something prohibited, that is now the forbidden fat within that scenario, he would have included it, and there would have been 5 sin offerings that would have been triggered. Since he didn't include that, obviously it's not because he didn't think of it, it must be that it doesn't work. That's the perspective of the question. And the Gemara answers, the absence of an oath with a more inclusive prohibition in the Mishnah does not indicate anything. When the Tana teaches the scenario above, he lists only the potential prohibitions that occur on their own in one act of eating, but he does not teach prohibitions that occur by the act of the person himself in the sense that he added an additional prohibition. That wasn't part of that discussion. It's not he didn't think of it, it wasn't relevant to the discussion. The Gemara asks, but doesn't the Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving benefit from consecrated property, which triggers the guilt offering, me'ila, which does not occur on its own, but only when an item has been consecrated, right? It had to have been consecrated for me'ila to occur. Yes, but do things only become consecrated when a person deems them consecrated? Are there other ways for something to become consecrated than a person consecrating it? Yes, there are. The Gemara answers, the case in the Mishna is that of a bechor, a firstborn animal, whose sanctity is from the womb, i.e. it begins automatically at birth. And if you wish, say instead in response to the question that when the Tana of the Mishnah teaches it, he includes only matters to which presenting a request for dissolution does not apply. An oath to which a request for dissolution applies is not taught. And the Gemara asks, doesn't the Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving from consecrated property? Consecration can be dissolved by a sage. And the Gemara answers, didn't we already establish that the case in the Mishnah is that of a bechor whose sanctity cannot be dissolved by a sage? And if you wish, say instead that when he teaches that case, he lists only those prohibitions for which one is liable to bring a fixed sin offering. If one breaks his oath, he is liable to bring a sliding scale offering. And the Tana of the Mishnah does not teach about the liability to bring other kinds of offerings. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't the Mishnah list the transgression of an impure person who ate consecrated items? The sacrificial animals mentioned in the Mishnah, which is a prohibition for which one brings a sliding scale offering. And the Gemara answers, the Mishnah is referring to a king who eats the leftover of a sacrificial animal while impure. And the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says a ritually impure king who ate consecrated items brings a male goat as a sin offering rather than the sliding scale offering brought by a commoner. Rav Ashi said a different answer. When the Tana teaches this case, he lists only matters that apply when one eats the measure of an olive bulk, whereas the case of an oath, which applies to eating even less than the standard measure, is not taught in the Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, doesn't the Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving benefit from misuse of consecrated property, me'ila, which applies to eating even less than an olive bulk? And the Gemara answers, we require that one derive the value of one peruta of benefit in order to be liable for me'ila, so that also is a prohibition to which standard measures apply, not sliding scale. And Rav Ashi of Avireya said that Rabbi Zeres said, when the Tana teaches the case, he lists only prohibitions for which intentional violation of them renders one liable to receive karas, and he does not teach prohibitions for which intentional violation of them renders one liable to receive lashes. And the Gemara says, whoa, but isn't the guilt offering for Me'ila, which is listed in the Mishnah, a prohibition for which the intentional violation of it renders one liable to receive lashes and not karas? And nevertheless, the Tana of the Mishnah teaches it. And the Gemara answers, we are speaking of sin offerings when we assert that the Mishnah lists only prohibitions for which one is liable to receive karas for their intentional violation. Again, we're sort of whittling down why an additional case wasn't included by saying what were the parameters of that Mishnah in another place, and can we learn a proof from it with respect to what we're talking about here. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Ravina offered a different answer, and we're on page 25a. He said, when the Tana teaches this case, he lists only those prohibitions that apply specifically to items that are edible. With regard to an oath, it is a matter that applies also to items that are not edible, and he does not teach it in that Mishnah. And the Gemara asks, but doesn't that Mishnah include in its list the prohibition against deriving benefit from the misuse of consecrated property, meila, which applies even to consecrated wood and stones? Meila doesn't necessarily apply to food. There's lots of different categories of consecrated property that you can't use for your own benefit, not just food. And the Gemara answers, rather, when the Tana teaches this case, he lists those prohibitions that apply to tangible matters. And with regard to an oath, it is something that also applies to intangible matters, such as I will sleep or I will not sleep. And the Tana does not teach it in that Mishnah. That's why it doesn't include oaths in that Mishnah. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 3. Tomorrow, we'll have class at special time, noon Pacific. Nina, let's make sure to post that on the Facebook page. But noon Pacific tomorrow, Sunday, because Shevuos, the holiday of Shevuos, not the track date Shevuos, which are different words. Shevuos means weeks, right? And that's the holiday that begins tomorrow night. And Shevuos means oaths, which is what we're studying here. But at any rate, our class will be noon Pacific tomorrow, Sunday. 2 quick questions. Bill, Malchus, right? Kingship, or Malkut, if you want to pronounce it more Sephardic, also includes the material world, God's sovereignty as in the Lord of the earth sort of thing. And it is in this that humanity is particularly God's steward or viceroy or governor. Adam is commanded to tend the garden, given oversight over the living things of the world, etc. It's also, sadly, a job we often do quite poorly. Yes, I agree with you. And also, we are God's steward in caring for ourselves, right? You have an obligation to care for your health, just like you have an obligation to care for the health of the environment and the health of the community, the health of the city. If you live in a city, we have responsibilities in this world, and we are meant, right, part of making a Kiddush Hashem, right, of sanctifying God's name by being a representative who executes God's will in this world, are these caretaking responsibilities. And Sharon, I asked this yesterday, but you didn't get to it, so here goes again. If a Jew who has fallen away from Jewish practice and then becomes a Baal Tshuva, right, so somebody who is returning to being an observant Jew, can he or she then take an oath not to eat non-kosher food? Well, it's interesting because whether the Jew is observant or not, the Jew is obligated not to eat non-kosher food. So that doesn't change when the Jew sort of disconnects himself or herself from the mitzvahs, from Torah observance, Torah study, etc. So on returning, it's interesting. What there is a commitment, right? And we're always trying to make that commitment. Rabbi Luria tonight in our third meal was talking about, what does it mean when we enter Shevuos tomorrow night, right? Which is what? It's the holiday of Matan Torah, the holiday that celebrates receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. That's what we're celebrating at Shevuos, 7 weeks after Passover. And we want it to be not just Matan Torah, the gift of Torah, but Kabbalah's Torah, receiving Torah, right? Making Torah more important in our lives. So we want to commit to something, maybe some kind of additional study, a new sefer, a new book that you're going to study, a new practice that you're going to bring into your life of Torah study. Finding a study partner and saying we're going to learn together once a week or once a month or once a day, whatever it is. Or I'm going to set aside, 2 minutes a day and I'm going to start reading this book. I'm going to set a timer, 2 minutes a day. I'm going to read that book. I can do that. I know some wonderful people who just took on, I'm just going to read 60 seconds, 1 minute a day with a timer of this book that I've been meaning to read for a long time. I can find 1 minute a day. And 1 minute a day, this person has read the whole book. It's amazing what you can accomplish with one dedicated minute. So that's a commitment, right? But in terms of swearing an oath, which then if you violate it, you're liable to bring sin offerings, which we can't even bring, right? Because the temple is not standing. I think that oath would not take effect, right? Because the things that they were doing when they weren't being observant and, were violating Torah, that was never permitted to them. The fact that they did it and didn't consider themselves obligated didn't mean that they weren't obligated. So I don't think that being a Baal Tshuva, which I am, all right, I have returned to Torah and to Judaism. I was once, very secular. But I don't think that just because, I considered myself erroneously to be not obligated, and then I realized that I am obligated, that an oath like that would take effect because I always was obligated, if that makes sense. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Sunday, special time, noon Pacific. All the best. Have a good night. Good vach.